A jagged tear in the fabric of the sky split the heavens apart, revealing an abyss of pulsing blue light. The world below held its breath as the alien vessel descended, a monolithic behemoth of blackened metal and shifting geometry. It loomed over Earth's atmosphere with eerie silence, its presence alone enough to drown cities in panic. In the United Nations emergency bunker beneath Geneva, President Ethan Walker's fingers dug into the armrest of his chair. The room, filled with the world's most powerful leaders, was suffocating in tension. Generals and diplomats whispered in hushed, frantic voices, their eyes fixed on the holographic projection in the center of the chamber, a live feed from orbit, where the vessel hung like an executioner's blade. Then, without warning, every screen on the planet flickered to static. A ripple of distortion spread through the airwaves, hijacking television broadcasts, disabling satellites, even interrupting power grids in some regions. And then it came. The voice. This is High Commander's score of the Zalari Dominion. It was deep and resonant, carrying an authority that defied distance. The language was alien, but somehow, impossibly, it translated itself into perfect, crisp human speech. The chamber fell silent. Earth's leaders, Score continued, his tone venomous. You have taken what does not belong to you. The screens sharpened into focus, revealing a figure unlike any humanity had seen before. Score's form was tall and sinewy, clad in dark armor that pulsed with an inner glow. His skin was obsidian with streaks of silver running along the ridges of his elongated skull. His 6 eyes burned with cold fire, but what struck the humans most was the fury written across his face. You have stolen our children, he declared. Gasps rippled through the room. Walker exchanged a quick, alarmed glance with Secretary-General Helena Vasquez, whose face had gone pale. We have no such captives, Vasquez said, though the words were barely above a whisper. Score's voice darkened. Do not insult my intelligence with lies. A second transmission appeared, a grainy, distorted video feed from an undisclosed location. The footage showed sterile metal walls, harsh white lights, and something small, curled up in the corner of a containment cell. A child. No, not human, but unmistakably young. Its skin was pale blue, its limbs frail, its dark eyes wide with fear. A tremor ran through the chamber. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Walker swallowed, his mind racing. This is fabricated, the Russian delegate muttered, but his voice wavered. 6 eyes narrowed. You have 1 planetary cycle to return them. If you fail, your world will suffer the consequences. With that, the transmission ended. The screens went dark, and the room erupted into chaos. Walker exhaled, forcing himself to keep his expression neutral even as dread clawed at his stomach. He turned to Vasquez, who was already issuing orders to intelligence analysts. They needed answers, immediately. An hour later, a classified report arrived on Walker's desk. His blood ran cold as he scanned the contents. It was real. Buried in the depths of a covert military research facility in the Nevada desert, the United States had, in fact, been holding alien juveniles. The official report claimed their retrieval had been an accident, the result of an unreported crash site years prior. The children had been kept under tight security, studied, and, if the internal notes were to be believed, never harmed. But none of that mattered now. The aliens believed Earth had stolen them, and they were demanding justice. Walker slammed the file shut and turned to General Holden, the hardened veteran leading the U.S. military's response. The older man's face was unreadable, but his fingers tapped restlessly against the desk. We need to return them, Walker said, his voice tight. We don't even know if they're alive, Holden countered, or what kind of threat they pose. They're children, Vasquez snapped, her patience fraying. And we have less than 24 hours before an interstellar fleet decides whether to incinerate our planet. Silence. The weight of it pressed against them. Walker inhaled deeply, then gave the order. Get a team in. Secure the captives. Prepare for immediate transport. Holden hesitated but nodded. The room stirred into motion, aides rushing to relay instructions, diplomats scrambling to craft a response. The clock was already ticking. Above them, in the night sky, the alien vessel remained unmoving. Watching. Waiting. The situation spiraled into chaos the moment the truth came to light. News of the captured alien juveniles had already begun to leak, sparking protests in major cities. Some demanded their immediate return, fearing the wrath of an advanced extraterrestrial force. Others, driven by paranoia and nationalism, insisted that surrendering them would be an act of weakness. Meanwhile, the 24-hour deadline loomed over humanity like an unblinking eye in the sky. Inside the Pentagon's underground command center, President Ethan Walker stood before a room of top military officials, scientists, and intelligence operatives. The air was thick with tension. A massive digital clock mounted on the far wall marked the time remaining before High Commander Skore's ultimatum expired, 19 hours and counting. Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of the lead xenobiologists assigned to the alien juveniles, rubbed her temples, exhaustion carving deep lines into her face. "They're not prisoners," she insisted. "We never harmed them. If anything, we've been trying to keep them alive." General Holden's arms remained crossed over his chest. "That won't matter to Skore. He sees this as an act of war." His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried an unmistakable edge. "And if we're wrong about his restraint, our cities will burn before we get the chance to explain." Walker scanned the room, seeking solutions. "How soon can we extract them from the facility?" A tense pause. Then, Agent Calloway, the CIA operative overseeing the classified installation, spoke. "That's complicated." "Complicated how?" Walker's patience was wearing thin. Calloway hesitated, then leaned forward. "There are factions within our own government that don't want this getting out. The research being conducted on the juveniles, legal or not, has been invaluable. They're afraid that returning them will expose everything." The words sent a fresh wave of silence crashing over the room. Walker clenched his jaw. He had expected resistance, but outright obstruction was a different beast entirely. Vasquez was the first to break the quiet. "Are you telling us there are people willing to risk planetary annihilation to keep a secret?" "Yes," Calloway said grimly. "And they won't surrender them without a fight." Walker exhaled sharply. There was no time for bureaucracy or political maneuvering. He turned to General Holden. "I want a team mobilized immediately. Get those kids out." Holden gave a firm nod and began issuing orders. Within the hour, a Black Ops unit was airborne, racing toward the Nevada desert. As the transport team neared the facility, Dr. Carter, now part of the extraction detail, stared out the window of the military aircraft. The sprawling expanse of sand and rock below was familiar. She had spent years working within those walls. Now, she was returning under orders to dismantle what she had spent so long protecting. The descent was swift and precise. The moment boots hit the ground, the team moved with lethal efficiency. But the resistance they encountered was fiercer than expected. Rogue security personnel, loyal to whatever shadow organization sought to keep the juveniles hidden, had barricaded the main entrance. The standoff was brief and violent. Muffled gunfire echoed through the underground corridors as the strike team forced their way inside. Carter stayed close to Commander Reeves, the unit leader. As they pressed deeper into the facility, she couldn't shake the eerie stillness of the place. The power had been partially cut, leaving only emergency lighting, pulsing red glows that made the halls feel like arteries in some great metallic beast. At last, they reached the containment sector. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold metal. Carter's pulse pounded as she entered the holding chamber, where the juveniles sat huddled in the dim light. There were 3 of them. Small, fragile, their luminous eyes wide with fear. She took a slow step forward and crouched. "It's okay," she said gently. "We're taking you home." One of them, the smallest, let out a soft, musical chittering sound. A language she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. Trust. The moment shattered when gunfire erupted outside. Reeves swore, pressing a finger to his earpiece. "We need to move now." Carter didn't hesitate. She gathered the closest juvenile into her arms while the other 2 clung to one another. The team ushered them out, moving with practiced urgency. By the time they reached the surface, smoke and the scent of scorched metal filled the air. The rogue faction had set fire to part of the installation in a last-ditch effort to destroy evidence. The team pushed forward, shielding the juveniles as bullets whizzed past. Then, just as they neared the waiting aircraft, A final shot rang out. Carter gasped as she felt a sharp, burning pain tear across her side. She staggered but didn't fall. Reeves yanked her forward, shoving her up the ramp as the last of the team piled in behind her. The doors sealed, and within seconds, the aircraft was lifting off, carrying them away from the ruins of the facility. Carter pressed a trembling hand to her side, feeling the warmth of blood seeping through her uniform. But she forced herself to focus on the juveniles, who now sat curled up beside her, safe at last. Reeves knelt beside her, assessing her wound. "You're lucky," he muttered. "Could have been worse." She gave a weak smile. "I'll take lucky." As the transport sped toward its destination, she let out a slow breath. They had the children. Now, they just had to survive long enough to return them. The alien vessel remained motionless in orbit, an ever-present reminder of the ticking clock. As the transport shuttle carrying the rescued juveniles streaked across the upper atmosphere, President Ethan Walker stood in the UN's Geneva Command Center, eyes locked on the holographic display tracking their approach. The room was thick with tension. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. Then, a transmission request flickered to life. High Commander Skor's image materialized before them, his 6 burning eyes scanning the room with cold fury. "You have the children." It was not a question. Walker straightened. "Yes. We are prepared to return them immediately." Skor's mandibles clicked, a sharp, deliberate sound. "And yet you expect this to be enough." His voice was a low rumble, restrained but deadly. "My people do not forget." The words sent a ripple of unease through the gathered officials. Walker measured his response carefully. "We acknowledge the wrongdoing, but these children were not harmed. We wish to make amends." Skor's gaze sharpened. "You believe yourself righteous because you return what you have stolen? Tell me, President Walker, if our positions were reversed, would you be so forgiving?" Silence. The shuttle carrying the juveniles breached the upper atmosphere. As it did, a ripple of energy spread from the alien mothership. The Earth's defense systems detected no weapons activation, yet every satellite, every drone, every missile guidance system faltered for a fraction of a second. A demonstration of power. A warning. Walker forced himself to remain steady. "What do you want?" The alien commander leaned forward, his elongated face filling the screen. "Justice." Before Walker could respond, the chamber's side doors slid open, and Dr. Evelyn Carter entered, flanked by security personnel. The bandages on her side were stark against her pale skin, but she ignored the pain. "High Commander Skor," she said, stepping forward. "I am one of the scientists who worked with your young." Skor turned his attention to her, his expression unreadable. "Did you take them?" "No," she said firmly. "But I helped care for them. They were dying when we found them. We saved them." A flicker of something unreadable passed through the alien's eyes. "And yet you caged them." She did not deny it. "Yes. But not to harm them. We didn't know who you were, what you wanted, if you were coming back. We only knew that they needed help." Skor exhaled, a deep, guttural sound. "You speak as if that absolves you." Before Carter could answer, the transmission shifted. A new figure entered the projection, one of the alien juveniles, now aboard the mothership. Smaller than the others, its luminous eyes were wide but steady. It made a soft chittering sound. The entire chamber held its breath. Skor stiffened, his expression unreadable as he listened to the rapid, musical cadence of its speech. When it finished, he closed his eyes for a long moment, his breathing slow and measured. When he opened them again, the fury had dimmed, but it had not vanished. "Kalari says you were kind." His voice was quieter now, though no less heavy. "That you did not hurt them." Walker took the opportunity to press forward. "Then you know we acted without malice. This was never meant to be an act of war." His gaze snapped to him. "Perhaps. But intentions do not erase the past." A beat of silence passed before he continued. "My people would see your world burn for what has been done. But Kalari speaks in your defense. That is the only reason you still draw breath." Walker felt the weight of those words settle over him. "Then what happens now?" Score's mandibles twitched slightly, an expression Walker could not decipher. We require truth. Not in words. Not in promises. His 6 eyes narrowed. In mind. The room tensed. Dr. Carter understood before anyone else. You want to see for yourself. Score did not deny it. One of you will submit to a mind scan. You will open your thoughts, your memories. We will witness what truly transpired. Walker's pulse quickened. A mind scan. The implications were terrifying. Alien technology capable of delving into the depths of human consciousness? There was no telling what it would expose, what it would cost. The chamber erupted into whispered debates. Some argued that it was too great a risk. Others insisted that refusing would only ensure their destruction. Then Carter stepped forward. I'll do it. Walker turned sharply. Dr. Carter, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice was calm, steady. She met Score's gaze without fear. If this is what it takes to prove we were not your enemies, then I will do it. Score regarded her for a long, silent moment. Then he gave a single, slow nod. Prepare yourself, human. The transmission cut out. The countdown on the wall continued. The fate of Earth would be decided in the next few hours. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood in the center of the UN command chamber, surrounded by the most powerful figures on Earth, yet she had never felt more alone. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on her, but she did not waver. High Commander Score had issued his demand, and she had accepted without hesitation. There was no turning back now. A low hum vibrated through the chamber as the transmission reconnected. Score's towering figure appeared once more, his 6 eyes unblinking as he assessed her. The alien commander extended a clawed hand, and a ripple of blue energy spread from his palm, forming a swirling vortex of light between them. The mind scan will reveal truth, he intoned. Memories cannot lie. If deception lingers within you, it will be exposed. Evelyn swallowed but kept her voice firm. I understand. The vortex expanded. A strange pressure filled the air, something ancient and vast pressing against the edges of her thoughts. For a brief, terrifying moment, she was certain she would be ripped apart, her mind unraveling under the weight of an intelligence far greater than her own. Then the connection took hold. Her vision blurred. The walls of the chamber melted away. She was no longer standing in the UN headquarters. She was floating, weightless, untethered. And then the memories began. She was back inside the research facility, watching as the alien juveniles were brought in for the first time. Their tiny, trembling forms. Their frightened eyes. The way they huddled together in the corner of their containment cell, whispering to one another in a language she could not understand. The memory shifted. She saw herself fighting with the military officials who treated the children as specimens instead of living beings. She saw the endless arguments, the sleepless nights spent trying to improve their conditions. She remembered Kalari, the smallest of them, growing sick, barely clinging to life. The desperate rush to save them. The cautious trust that had formed in the weeks that followed. The images flashed faster now. Kalari reaching for her hand. The first time they chirped in curiosity instead of fear. The moment they stopped flinching whenever a human entered the room. And then, the day everything changed. The orders had come from above. The research was being shut down. The juveniles were to be transferred to a classified location. She had argued, pleaded, but there had been no stopping it. She had stood helplessly as they were sedated, carried away by men who saw them as nothing more than leverage in a conflict humanity had never intended to start. A searing pain tore through her skull, and suddenly she was back, gasping as the connection severed. She staggered, knees nearly giving out, but strong hands caught her before she collapsed. Walker. His face was tight with concern, but she barely registered it. Score remained still, his expression unreadable. Silence stretched. Then, finally, he spoke. You fought for them. His voice was quiet now, lacking its earlier fury. Evelyn took a deep breath, still dizzy from the scan. Yes. Score studied her for a long moment before turning to Kalari, who had been watching from the transmission feed. The juvenile made a soft, musical trill, their small hands pressing against the display. Skor exhaled slowly. His shoulders, once rigid with fury, eased slightly. "The Dominion does not forgive easily," he said, his voice heavy. "But we are not without reason." Walker straightened. "Then you will stand down?" Skor's gaze flicked toward him, lingering before he spoke again. "We will take our young and leave your world unharmed. But understand this, there will be no second chances." Walker nodded. "Understood." The tension that had suffocated the room for hours finally began to lift. Minutes later, arrangements were made. A secure transport was dispatched to the pre-agreed coordinates, where the juveniles would be transferred to their people. No weapons. No tricks. Just an act of trust, however fragile. Evelyn watched from the observation deck as the alien vessel's gravity field lifted the children into its hold. Kalari turned back one last time, their luminous eyes locking onto hers. Then they were gone, vanishing into the endless void of space. As the ship faded from sight, Walker stepped beside her. "You just saved 8 billion lives." She let out a slow breath. "I just did what was right." The Earth still stood. But the stars had never felt closer.